The Imperium of man, vast and sprawling across a million worlds, has always appeared eternal. Yet beneath its towering spires and holy fortresses, cracks are forming, imperceptible to most, but deep and irreparable. The galaxy has never been kind to humanity, it has always been a crucible of fire, xenos invasion, and betrayal. And now, with the space marines dwindling, the cracks have widened into chasms. These superhuman warriors, once the embodiment of the Emperor's wrath and protection, are fading into history, their chapters thinned, their gene seed faltering, their legendary feats remembered as tales told in hushed reverence. Humanity, ever reliant on these demigods, begins to sense the void that is slowly creeping into the Imperium. Across countless star systems, the absence of the Space Marines is first noticed not in the battles themselves, but in the subtle ways fear begins to take root. Governors, planetary commanders, and priests whisper of unseen threats, of enemies that once would have been crushed under the might of a Space Marine strike force. The populations of these worlds, once emboldened by tales of heroic intervention, now walk with cautious steps, eyes scanning the horizon for dangers that feel larger than life yet increasingly inevitable. The sense of dread is almost tangible, like the calm before a storm that refuses to announce its arrival. Even within the Adeptus Astartes themselves, signs of decay are evident. Chapters once renowned for their invincibility now report losses they cannot replace. Battle brothers, their numbers shrinking, face the bitter truth that their purpose is running out of time. Many cling to tradition, believing in the legend of the Emperor's mandate, yet whispers of failure and mortality haunt the halls of their bastions. Young initiates are fewer, their training marred by the shortage of masters, while the oldest veterans carry scars of centuries of war, their bodies and minds taxed beyond endurance. It is not sudden, it is a slow, creeping decline, a death foretold across millennia yet ignored until the signs can no longer be denied. Outside the bastions, the galaxy is changing in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Rogue traders notice more worlds falling into lawlessness, minor xenos raids becoming emboldened, and cults of chaos gaining a foothold where previously their whispers were quickly silenced. The Adeptus Mechanicus records a slight but troubling drop in compliance from distant forges, hinting at unrest that could spread. And somewhere, on worlds both loyal and neglected, ordinary humans, farmers, laborers, and soldiers, begin to sense that their protectors, the legends they grew up hearing about, are no longer infallible. Faith becomes tinged with anxiety. Reverence with fear. This is the quiet before the storm. It is not marked by explosions or grand battles, it is marked by absence, by the sense that something sacred has slipped through humanity's fingers. In this quiet, the galaxy does not yet know that it is standing on the precipice of extinction, that the guardians it has relied upon for 10,000 years are dwindling into memory. And as the shadows lengthen across the stars, as the last flickers of hope cling to the tales of old heroes, a single truth becomes undeniable. The Space Marines, those immortal warriors of legend, are dying, and when they are gone, nothing will ever be the same. The first cracks appeared not in fire and blood, but in whispers and rumors. Across the stars, news began to spread of chapters disappearing without trace, of strike forces failing where victory was once guaranteed. Worlds once proud and unyielding trembled as governors and planetary leaders realized the defenders of legend would not come to answer their pleas. Markets faltered, supplies ran short, and fleets once steadfast in maintaining order began to drift in disarray, unsure where to deploy their limited strength. Humanity, long accustomed to reliance on superhuman champions, began to feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down upon it. Fear, once distant and abstract, had become intimate. It settled in hearts like a cold, invisible hand, tightening with every report of a lost chapter, a missing battle brother, a fortress world consumed by unknown horrors. It was in this fragile state that opportunists emerged from the shadows. Chaos cults, long suppressed and fragmented, began to coalesce, emboldened by the absence of the Imperium's finest. Xenos warlords, orc warbands, Tyranid splinter fleets, even the enigmatic Necrons, started to probe borders previously fortified by the mere presence of a space marine garrison. And among humanity itself, ambitious lords and governors, their loyalty strained by fear and ambition, began maneuvering for power, some turning to treachery to preserve their own worlds. The galaxy had become a chessboard, and the pieces that had long enforced order were fading from play, leaving nothing but uncertainty and hunger in their place. Across countless worlds, the void left by the Space Marines began to manifest in very real, horrifying ways. Planets that once knew security now became hunting grounds for Xenos raiders. Minor rebellions spiraled into violent uprisings, and the seeds of chaos took root in areas where vigilance had weakened. Ordinary citizens, once confident in the protection of their immortal champions, found themselves armed with little more than fear and crude weapons, forced to defend against threats they could barely comprehend. Entire sectors began to whisper of the vanished angels, warriors who had been humanity's shield for generations, now fading into memory, leaving humanity exposed and vulnerable. Even within the Imperium's walls, panic began to ripple. High-ranking officers of the Imperial Guard, accustomed to coordinating with Space Marine detachments for strategic operations, found themselves facing an impossible reality. The most dangerous engagements could no longer be relied upon for the miraculous interventions of battle brothers. The bureaucracy, rigid and sprawling as ever, could not adapt fast enough. Fleets were misdirected, reinforcements delayed, and precious resources squandered in hesitation. Each mistake amplified the sense of impending collapse, each failure a reminder that the galaxy's most formidable warriors were no longer there to tip the balance. And yet, amid the rising chaos, a subtle, almost cruel irony emerged. As the Space Marines receded into myth, the people of the Imperium who had taken their protection for granted began to understand what it had meant to live under their shadow. Legends once dismissed as stories became prayers, memories of heroic deeds transformed into desperate hope. Children spoke of them in awe, priests invoked them as saints. But hope without power is fragile, and the galaxy was rapidly discovering that reverence alone could not repel the horrors now pressing against humanity's borders. The first cracks were small, easily dismissed at first: isolated incidents, local uprisings, strange reports from distant sectors. But they multiplied like fractures in a massive edifice, each one weakening the structure, until soon the Imperium itself felt the tremors. Fear spread faster than armies, uncertainty faster than fleets, and what had once been an unshakable bastion of order began to feel like a fragile illusion. Humanity was waking to the truth: the galaxy was no longer protected by its immortal champions. The Guardians were fading, and in their absence, the seeds of total collapse had already begun to sprout. The galaxy did not fall in a single moment. It collapsed in waves, slow at first, subtle enough to be ignored, then relentless, violent, and impossible to stop. The absence of the Space Marines was no longer a rumor or distant worry. It had become a tangible weakness, a blank void that predators sensed instinctively. And across the stars, those predators began to move. Tyranid hive splinters that had previously been held at bay found entire sectors undefended, drifting toward them like ravenous storms seeking shorelines made of flesh. Orc warlords, sensing that the famous beakies no longer appeared to ruin their fun, launched massive WAHs that thundered across frontier systems without resistance. Even the most passive Xenos races grew bold, testing imperial borders that once felt impenetrable. The predators had waited long enough. Now they fed. The first major worlds to fall did so with shocking ease. They were not backwater colonies or insignificant outposts, but thriving planets with dense populations and long histories of imperial loyalty. Without Astarte's intervention, their defenses broke like glass under the combined pressure of panic and invasion. The Imperial Guard fought bravely, but the Guard was built for scale, not speed, for endurance, not miracle. Where a handful of space marines could have changed the course of a war, entire regiments now died buying hours, not victories. And across these dying worlds, the truth spread faster than any enemy fleet. Humanity had lost its shield, and the galaxy had sensed the opening. Within the Imperium's heartlands, political fractures deepened into chasms. Administrators and governors who once relied on the promise of swift Astartes justice found themselves forced to choose between loyalty and survival. Some worlds fortified themselves, shutting down communication channels and declaring martial law. Others broke away entirely, declaring independence in a desperate attempt to avoid being dragged into the Imperium's death spiral. Chaos cults seized upon this instability with a fervor unmatched in centuries, whispering promises into the ears of the desperate and ambitious. They spread like wildfire through the cracks in imperial authority, turning once holy shrines into breeding grounds for heresy. And with every cult that rose, with every planet that rebelled, the Imperium's grip loosened just a little more. Meanwhile, among the remnants of the Space Marines themselves, the decline became undeniable. Chapters once considered eternal guardians now struggled to muster even 100 warriors. Entire companies were missing, battle brothers presumed dead in far-off war zones where no reinforcements ever arrived. Some chapters withdrew into their fortress monasteries, sealing their gates as if preparing for an ending they could not prevent. Others fought with increasing desperation, knowing that every fallen brother was irreplaceable. Their sacrifices grew larger, their victories fewer, and their future darker with every passing day. It was as if the galaxy itself conspired to snuff out the last sputtering flames of their once blazing legacy. Stories began to circulate among humanity. Stories of space marines dying in battles too vast for their dwindling numbers to survive. Stories of entire chapters making last stands on doomed worlds, fighting not for victory, but for dignity in the face of extinction. These tales, told by refugees and survivors, spread like sacred scripture through the Imperium. They inspired awe, grief, and a deep, aching realization that the age of heroes was ending. Children who once dreamed of becoming Astartes now whispered their names as if invoking spirits long gone. The galaxy's darkness grew thicker, and even hope seemed to choke beneath its weight. In the midst of this chaos, the psychic echoes of despair reached the Imperium. The warp stirred with hunger. Demons, sensing weakness and opportunity, slipped through reality's thinning veil with increasing frequency. Entire planets were consumed in nightmare incursions where time fractured and sanity dissolved. Without the rapid, decisive intervention of Space Marine strike forces, these outbreaks spiraled out of control. The Inquisition struggled to contain them, stretched thinner than ever, their resources fractured by constant emergencies. Reality itself felt as though it were suffocating beneath the weight of unchecked warp corruption. This was the Dark Ascendancy, the moment when humanity's enemies grew stronger not because they had changed, but because humanity had grown weaker. The Imperium had once been able to endure anything, for it had possessed warriors who defied fate itself. But now, as the galaxy descended into anarchy, it became painfully clear that the Space Marines had not merely been humanity's defenders. They had been its anchor. Without them, the tides of the galaxy pulled harder, dragging entire civilizations into the abyss. The darkness was no longer approaching. It was here, it was rising, and humanity stood upon its shores with no champions left to hold it back. The collapse did not arrive with warning. It came like an eclipse, silent at first, then absolute, swallowing everything in its shadow. Worlds that had stood strong for centuries suddenly found themselves isolated, surrounded by a darkness that stretched across regions once secured by the proud banners of the Adeptus Astartes. Communication lines fractured, astropathic choirs screamed with visions of doom, and the Emperor's light, once faint but steadfast, seemed to flicker in the minds of his faithful. This was not merely decline anymore. It was the unraveling of an empire so vast and ancient that many believed it could never truly fall. But the truth revealed itself with merciless clarity. without the Space Marines, the Imperium of man was not eternal. It was mortal, and its mortality had come to claim it at last. The fall of the final chapters marked the turning point, the moment the galaxy crossed the threshold between survival and oblivion. Reports of their last battles spread like ghostly echoes, traveling faster than the ships that carried them. One by one, the last known Astartes chapters met their end, not through cowardice or retreat, but through the impossible, crushing reality of numbers. They fought as they always had, fearlessly, with a fury that transcended human limitation. But courage does not refill dwindling ranks. Valor does not forge new gene seed. And so, on dead worlds lost to the warp, on crumbling hive cities torn apart by alien claws, on desolate moons scarred by 10,000 wars, the final Space Marines made their last stands. One chapter died defending a pilgrimage world overrun by demonic legions. Their armored forms fought until their ceramite was cracked and their blood seeped into the sacred soil. Another chapter vanished amidst a tyrannid swarm so vast that even their heroic resistance could not be recorded in full. All that remained were fragmented vox logs and broken armor pieces floating in space like funeral offerings. Yet another chapter fell holding back an orc WAAGH. So unrestrained that it devoured an entire sector in weeks. Their deaths were glorious, but glory meant nothing without survival. And as each chapter was snuffed out, the galaxy seemed to grow dimmer, as if the stars themselves mourned the passing of those who had burned so fiercely against the void. With the Astartes gone, chaos rose unchallenged. Demon worlds, once contained through constant pressure, began bleeding into real space at catastrophic rates. Warp storms expanded, swallowing entire subsectors. Without the Astartes to strike swiftly and decisively, the Imperium's responses grew sluggish and chaotic. Imperial Guard regiments, brave but mortal, were devoured by horrors they were never meant to face alone. Fleets disappeared into the Imperium without explanation, their last transmissions filled with static, screaming, or ominous silence. The Mechanicus, overwhelmed by attacks on its forge worlds, struggled to maintain even minimal production. The machine gods offered no salvation, the forges burned on, but the warriors needed to wield their creations were gone forever. Even the great bastions of humanity, Terra, Baal, Macragge, Cadia's ruins, felt the crushing weight of the loss. On Terra, the High Lords found their authority slipping as panic spread through the countless layers of the imperial bureaucracy. Distrust festered, rivalries erupted, and among the populace, whispers began circulating that the emperor himself had abandoned them. Priests silenced such words with fire and execution, but even death could not erase doubt once it took root in the mind of a dying empire. Without the angels of death patrolling its borders and inspiring awe among its populace, the Imperium became a massive colossus with broken limbs, forced to defend itself with whatever was left. The enemies of humanity sensed their moment in full. Tyrannid hive fleets, no longer checked by swift Astartes interference, poured into the galaxy in numbers that defied comprehension. Orc war leaders launched invasions of unprecedented size, their laughter echoing across battlefields where human lines broke like dry twigs. Necron tomb worlds awakened in synchronized waves, calculating the perfect moment to strike now that humanity's finest warriors were no longer present to hinder their awakening. Even the Eldar, ancient and weary, withdrew into their craft worlds, refusing to waste resources on a species they believed doomed by its own dependency. And amidst this destruction, humanity itself began to fracture. Planets that once pledged unwavering loyalty now fought to preserve their own existence, declaring independence or forming localized alliances. Civil wars erupted as desperate leaders turned to treachery, making pacts with xenos, bartering relics of their own past for fleeting promises of survival. The Imperium's unity, already fragile, shattered into dust. What had once been a vast, interconnected body now became a collection of gasping fragments, each struggling to avoid suffocation. As the galaxy drowned in chaos, one chilling truth became clear: the Space Marines had not merely protected humanity. They had given it something far more vital: fear in its enemies, unity among its people, and hope in its darkest hours. Without them, the galaxy no longer hesitated to strike. Without them, humanity no longer believed it could endure. And in that void of belief, in the silent spaces left behind by the death of its greatest warriors, the Imperium faced a reality it could no longer deny. Humanity had lost more than soldiers. It had lost its sons, its legends, and its myth made manifest. And as the storm raged across the stars, consuming everything it touched, there remained only one question: without the Space Marines, what future, if any, remained for mankind? In the wake of the galactic storm, there was no triumph. No declaration of victory. Only silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that spread across the scattered remnants of humanity like a shroud. The Imperium of man had once been a monolith of unyielding faith and iron discipline, held together not by stability but by the relentless will of its defenders. Now, without the Space Marines, that monolith had fractured into 1,000 drifting pieces. Across the stars, the echoes of war slowly faded, leaving behind worlds scarred beyond recognition and civilizations reduced to flickering embers. Humanity had survived before without hope, but never without its angels. And now, those angels were gone. On countless planets, people emerged from bunkers, ruins, and shattered hive cities to a galaxy they no longer recognized. Some found their skies darkened by the remnants of tyrannid biomass, still drifting in the upper atmosphere like the shadows of monstrous gods. Others walked through forests regrown over the bones of cities, where nature had reclaimed what war left behind. Entire continents lay abandoned, their populations vanished, some devoured, some enslaved, others simply gone, their fate unknowable. And on the few worlds that remained relatively intact, humanity clung to routine not because it brought comfort, but because it was the only thing keeping despair at bay. The Imperium itself was Imperium in name only. Across the Imperium, rumors begin to spread, quiet at first, like faint tremors before a planetary quake. Whispers of artificial giants, of soulless warriors forged in red dust, of the Mechanicus playing God, circulate through covert Vox networks and forbidden data looms. The High Lords deny everything, even as their own agents demand answers. The Inquisition grows restless, split between factions who want to shut Mars down completely and those who secretly encourage the experiments out of growing fear. For the first time since the Horus Heresy, the Imperium finds itself caught between its own survival and its own laws. And still, Mars continues its work in absolute silence. But silence rarely means peace. Within the deep crimson valleys of Mars, where the air vibrates with static charge and ancient machines slumber like dormant titans, a project emerges that eclipses everything attempted before. The Fabricator General authorizes a secretive initiative known only as Project Heliox, the most heretical scientific undertaking since the Emperor walked among mortals. Its goal is not merely to recreate the Space Marines, but to replace them with something that can survive the future humanity is accelerating toward. Something immune to extinction. Something that cannot die. The architects of Heliox work in absolute isolation. Their laboratory is a cathedral of steel and burning copper light, suspended above a chasm of molten forges. No human voices echo here, only the grinding of gears, the rhythmic chanting of data prayer, and the constant hum of machines older than Terra's oldest mountains. At the center lies a containment cradle unlike any other. Within it rests a single humanoid figure, suspended in an eerie amber glow. It is not flesh. It is not metal. It is something between, a hybrid organism woven from gene seed templates, living ferroplast, psychically inert marrow, and a lattice of self-repairing nanostructures. The priests call it the Heliox Prototype. Before activating the prototype, the Mechanicus attempts one last safeguard: they simulate consciousness. They inject digitally coded behavioral templates, loyalty, discipline, strategic instinct, through neurocircuits grown like crystalline vines within the prototype's skull. Yet nothing stabilizes. Each template dissolves before imprinting. The hybrid body rejects programming, rejects identity, rejects intention. The prototype is alive but empty, a mind waiting for something unnamed, something the Mechanicus cannot give. Eventually, the decision is made, activate it anyway. When the containment cradle opens, the chamber plunges into total darkness. Emergency cog lights flicker to life in scattered pulses of crimson. The prototype steps forward, not with the thunderous gait of a space marine, but with slow, measured movements, like a newborn adapting to gravity for the first time. Its eyes glow with a dim, unreadable shimmer, neither warp-tainted nor purely mechanical. Something other. The tech priests approach it cautiously, their mechadendrites trembling with both awe and dread. They attempt basic commands. The prototype obeys. They test its strength. It surpasses every known biological benchmark. They test its reflexes. It reacts faster than any human-derived neural pathway should allow. They test its resilience. It regenerates. And yet, the prototype does not speak, does not express emotion, does not display the faintest trace of human will. It simply exists, waiting for direction like a perfectly balanced blade. For the Mechanicus, this is enough. They celebrate the achievement quietly, reverently. In their eyes, they have created something superior to the Astartes, warriors who cannot succumb to mutation, who do not rely on unstable gene seed, and who do not require a soul that can be preyed upon by the warp. Pure function, pure efficiency, a new kind of soldier. But not everyone sees a miracle. The Inquisition learns of Heliox through covert channels. A heavily encrypted report reaches Terra describing entities without psychic presence, warriors immune to both faith and corruption, and a class of soldier impossible to spiritually influence. To the Ordo Hereticus, that sounds not like salvation, but a threat. A soldier who cannot be judged, cannot be controlled, cannot be guided, either by fear, by devotion, or by the Emperor's lingering psychic light, is a soldier who belongs to no one. The High Lords convene in secret. Some argue that Heliox represents humanity's only hope for survival. Others insist that Mars has finally crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Beneath the layers of bureaucracy and ceremony, the fear is simple and primal. If the Mechanicus can create warriors with no soul, what prevents them from creating an army with no loyalty? As the debate intensifies across the Imperium, the prototype stands motionless in a Martian vault, silent, obedient, unaware of the storm it has already unleashed. It does not know what it is. It does not know what it was meant to replace. It does not know the legacy of giants that came before it. But deep within its hybrid neural core, something begins to stir. Something neither mechanical nor human. Something waiting for a spark, though no one knows whether that spark will bring salvation, evolution, or annihilation. The silence inside the Mechanicus vault deepens as the Heliox prototype remains perfectly still, its unreadable gaze fixed forward as if staring into a non-existent horizon. Around it, tech priests move with sacred precision, recording biochemical fluctuations, neural patterns, and metabolic cycles with obsessive reverence. But across Mars, beyond the steel walls and sacred forges, something else is happening, something the Mechanicus did not expect. In the warp, in the psychosphere, in the lingering spiritual echo of the Imperium's fallen giants, a disturbance forms. The extinction of the Space Marines had created a psychic void, a rippling absence that had once been filled with unwavering purpose, brotherhood, and sacrifice. Billions had prayed to these superhuman warriors for 10,000 years. Entire planets had whispered their names in their darkest nights. Their deaths left behind something like a cosmic wound, an ache that pulsed through the warp like a fading heartbeat. Now, thanks to Project Heliox, that wound begins to shift. Not heal, not close, but shift, as if something in the warp has noticed that humanity is attempting to fill the void left by its greatest champions. And whatever this presence is, it is not silent. Imperial psychers across dozens of star systems begin collapsing mid-ritual, screaming about shadows wearing armor of flesh metal, about giants without faces, about spirits clawing at the void where the Astartes used to be. Astropaths report phantom signals, echoes of space marine battle cries, fractured oaths of loyalty, and pleas for vengeance that distort into static before they can be translated. At first, these reports are dismissed as psychic residue, the lingering aftershocks of extinction. But soon the patterns become too consistent, too organized, too deliberate. Something is trying to speak. Something is trying to return. Something old. Something powerful. Something angry. Meanwhile, on Mars, the Heliox Prototype begins to display anomalies. Only the most sensitive Auspex instruments detect them, microscopic shifts in neural activity, flickers of unidentifiable energy at the edge of its consciousness. It begins turning its head toward empty corners of the room, reacting to stimuli no human, no machine, no sensor can detect. The tech priests dismiss this as emergent behavior. But Amagos biologist observing the readings in secret feels something icy and primal coil in her chest. These signals are not mechanical. They are not biological. They are not even natural. They are responses. And then the dreams begin. At first, they are small tremors within the Imperium, fragmented visions spreading like a fever. Sleepers across the Imperium, soldiers, scribes, common laborers, even children, begin dreaming of towering figures marching across battlefields lit by dying suns. But these giants are not the noble Astartes they remember from hololithic murals. These figures are warped by memory and darkness, shifting shapes of armor and shadow, eyes burning like dying stars, voices echoing in languages that scrape against the mind. In every dream, the giants do the same thing. They point toward Mars, and they whisper a single word. Not in low Gothic, not in high Gothic, but in something older, something primal, something that makes the dreamers wake up gasping. Return. The Inquisition grows alarmed. Dream propagation on a mass scale is no coincidence. Psychers report that the dreams emanate from a single point in the warp, the enormous psychic imprint left behind by the Space Marines, an echo preserved by 10 millennia of devotion. The phenomenon becomes known as the Echo Legion, a phantom army of memories and spiritual residue. At first, the Echo Legion seems harmless, a collective hallucination shaped by grief. But soon, psychers begin reporting something far more sinister. The Echo Legion is searching. Searching for a host. Searching for form. Searching for vessels. And every psychic trace they follow leads them back to Mars, to the Heliox Prototype. Back beneath Olympus Mons, the prototype stands motionless in its chamber, unaware of the billions of minds dreaming of its existence. Unaware that something vast and fractured is drifting toward it through the warp like a dying constellation. The tech priests continue their studies, but they do not realize that the prototype's neural lattice has begun recording signals it was never designed to detect. It is absorbing psychic data, not directly, but as residual impressions echoing through the warp's thinning veil. And for the first time, something resembling thought stirs within its hollow consciousness. Not a sentence, not a memory, not an emotion, just a feeling, a pull, a call. A sensation of wanting. The prototype raises its head. For the first time, its fingers twitch. For the first time, its breathing deepens. For the first time, it wakes. Not because the Mechanicus succeeded. Not because its systems reached stability. But because the Echo Legion has finally found something to cling to. A vessel of flesh and metal empty enough for their fractured souls to fill. Yet strong enough to carry the weight of their rage. As the hybrid warrior takes its first conscious step, the alarms across Mars flicker, glitch, then scream. Because this awakening was not supposed to happen. The alarms that erupt across Mars do not begin with sound, they begin with light. A blinding surge of white gold static explodes through every cogitator, every lumen strip, every sensor array. For a heartbeat, the entire red planet seems to flicker out of existence, swallowed by a wash of raw, uncontrolled data. Tech priests reel as their augmetic eyes overload, mechadendrites convulsing like live serpents. Even the noosphere, the collective electronic mind of the Mechanicus, screams in a burst of distortion so intense that thousands of tech adepts collapse mid-task, their neural implants frying in their skulls. And at the center of it all, standing motionless in the containment chamber beneath Olympus Mons, the Heliox Prototype opens its eyes, not with mechanical coldness, not with blank obedience, but with a depth that should be impossible for a creature without a soul. Its eyes shine with memories that are not its own. Pain that wasn't created in a laboratory. Oaths it never swore. Wars it never fought. 1,000 voices cry inside its mind, each one belonging to a warrior who once walked the galaxy as an Astartes, now only a fragmented echo drifting in the warp's shadow. The Echo Legion has found its anchor. The tech priests in the chamber freeze, confusion twisting into creeping horror as their instruments begin to spike uncontrollably. The prototype's psychic inertness was once absolute, but now its readings resemble a star-going supernova. The hybrid body should not be capable of channeling warp resonance. Its marrow is psychically null. Its organs are designed to resist immaterial intrusion. But the Echo Legion is not intruding, they are inhabiting. Not as demons, not as warp spirits, but as souls searching for a body that can carry their legacy. One Mago stumbles back, whispering in disbelief. Impossible, it has no astral signature, how can echoes bind to emptiness? But emptiness is precisely why they chose it. A hollow vessel is the easiest to fill. The prototype lifts its head, slow, heavy, as though the weight of 1,000 ghost memories drags against its synthetic nerves. It takes 2 steps forward, the impact shaking the ground with a force far greater than its frame should allow. Each movement is unsteady, as if dozens of wills are fighting for control inside one body. Its breath comes in ragged bursts, like someone drowning in a sea of voices. Then, without warning, its posture straightens. Its hands relax. Its breathing steadies. The echoes have synchronized, merged, harmonized into something new. Not a space marine, not an artificial titan, not a soul, not a machine, but a fusion of memory and matter, a being shaped by the residue of extinction, given form by the desperation of humanity's forgotten giants. The chamber doors slam open as Skitarii guards rush in, weapons locked and ready. Mars emergency protocols dictate immediate neutralization of unstable bioforms. The guards form a semicircle, their galvanic rifles humming, targeting lenses focusing. Tech priests scream warnings, but they come too late. The prototype turns toward the soldiers. The room darkens. Not physically, psychically. The air vibrates with the presence of warriors long dead, their rage whispering through the hybrid body. And for the first time, the prototype speaks. Its voice is deep, layered, distorted by the spectral tones of countless echoes. A single sentence, ancient, sacred, and spoken in the solemn cadence of a warrior order that no longer exists. For the Emperor, the Skitarii hesitate, not from fear, but from confusion. That hesitation lasts 1 second too long. The prototype moves, but not with violent intent. It simply raises its hand. Yet the gesture unleashes a shockwave that detonates every lumen in the chamber, every auspex panel, every servo skull. The Skitarii are hurled backward as if struck by an Astartes dreadnought. The tech priests recoil, their minds racing. The prototype is not attacking. It is reacting, instinctively, defensively, guided by emotions that do not belong to it. Memories flash inside its mind, visions of battles from across 10 millennia. Ultramarine brothers falling beside shattered banners. Space wolves howling through blizzards of heretic fire. Blood angels descending like crimson meteors upon swarms of xenos. Every echo pours a lifetime of war into the hybrid frame, shaping musculature, reflex, posture, stance. The Echo Legion is no longer a phantom. It is becoming a soldier. A singular entity. built from countless fallen champions. But the awakening has consequences. Across the warp, something ancient and monstrous notices. Something that has hunted the Astartes for millennia senses the spark of their return, no matter how faint, no matter how distorted. The psychic wound left by extinction shifts once more, drawing attention, not from fractured spirits but from predators. The prototype stumbles, clutching its head as a new wave of pressure slams into its mind. Not from Mars, not from the living, but from beyond the Imperium's veil. As if the warp itself is reaching for it, curious, hungry, amused. The Echo Legion murmurs through the hybrid's mind, whispering warnings, ancient instincts rising like fire. They know this presence. They fought it for 10,000 years. Chaos has sensed the rebirth. And it is coming. The alarms across Mars continue to howl, not just for a containment breach, not just for psychic anomalies, but for something far greater. A storm is rising. A second extinction is already beginning. And in the heart of Mars, the first warrior of a new, unnatural era stands trembling, not with fear, but with the impossible weight of 1,000 ghost soldiers urging it to stand tall. The prototype breathes in. All the echoes breathe with it. Something new has been born. Something impossible. Something dangerous. The moment Chaos senses the awakening of the Echo Legion, the warp shudders like a wounded beast. The psychic void left by the extinction of the Space Marines had been a feast. An open grave where demons writhed through memories, savoring the despair of a galaxy robbed of its mightiest defenders. But now that void flickers with a new, unfamiliar light. Not strong, not stable, but defiant. A spark, a challenge, a whisper that the Astartes, those hated, beloved, relentless, maddening foes, might not be gone forever. And Chaos hungers. The first crack appears along the edge of the Phobos maelstrom, a place where reality is already thin as smoke. The warp buckles outward, forming a distortion that pulses like a heartbeat. From within that impossible light, a presence stirs, ancient, hateful, and delighted by the scent of returning prey. Thousands of demonic entities swarm toward the tear, screeching in warped imitation of laughter. They do not wait for an invitation. They erupt across the void like a plague of impossible colors. The galaxy's long simmering silence fractures. On Mars, the Mechanicus realizes what they have unleashed. Not a savior, not a weapon, not a replacement for the Astartes, but a beacon, a flare of psychic distress bright enough to attract every predator in the Imperium. In the dimly lit chamber beneath Olympus Mons, the prototype, still trembling under the weight of the Echo Legion, senses the shift in the warp. A cold dread washes through its borrowed memories. Phantom voices erupt inside its mind, shouting warnings in the languages of long-dead chapters. It drops to one knee, not because of external force, but because of the crushing pressure of terror echoing through its stolen consciousness. The tech priests watch in fascinated horror. Their creation is powerful, but it is not ready. Not stable, not whole. Yet the warp does not care. War never waits for perfection. War comes when it chooses. Suddenly, the noosphere explodes with priority alerts from across the solar system. Demon incursions detected in the outer layers of the Sol sphere. Unidentified warp rifts opening beyond Terra's orbit. The Phobos maelstrom is expanding unnaturally. Contact lost with multiple Blackstone monitoring stations. Even the Astronomicon flickers, a dimming heartbeat echoing across the psychic winds. Chaos is not simply attacking. Chaos is converging, drawn like sharks to the scent of blood in the water. Drawn to Mars. The ground beneath the red planet trembles as the first shockwave hits the atmosphere, a ripple of reality distortion that makes the air shimmer. Skitarii legions mobilize instantly, Titan cohorts awaken in their hangars, and the Mechanicus initiates protocol sequences reserved for the end of the world. But everything is too slow. Chaos is too fast. The Predator has already sunk its claws in. As the Mechanicus prepares for battle, a small tremor shakes the chamber. The prototype rises to its feet, slowly, painfully, as if fighting against a storm inside its skull. But its eyes burn brighter than before. Not with the emptiness of a machine. Not with the hollow glow of engineered flesh. But with something fierce, fractured, and ancient. The Echo Legion is awakening fully now, pushing through the prototype's unused pathways, claiming territory across its hybrid nerves. Memories fuse with instincts. Pain merges with purpose. Voices become one.